Hi, welcome to this talk about federating the content layer. My name is Gijs. I'm the head of product at HighGraph, and I'm very excited to talk to you about this new topic, content federation, that we've recently introduced. Just a few notes about HighGraph, who we are as a company. First of all, we are GraphQL native. And not just GraphQL native, we're a GraphQL native content platform. So we started as a headless CMS with the first that had a GraphQL API, and it's still our only API. We focus fully on GraphQL. And then, of course, we have a super powerful interface as well for managing content. Next to that, the API we provide for developers, we provide a great experience for business users as well. The third key point I wanted to mention is this content federation capability. This is, of course, the topic of this talk, so I'll talk a lot more about it. But the basic idea is that it allows you to combine data across all these different backends and services into a single great GraphQL API. All right, so let's dive in. Before I can talk about content federation specifically, I want to actually take a step back, take a little trip down memory lane, and talk a little bit about how the CMS, the content management system category, and how this idea got started. And what I'm going to do is talk about how this evolved, and then make the case that this content federation and orchestration is a very logical extension of content management. All right, so let's start with taking this quick look back. So in the 90s, as the internet got its start and really became popular, the first websites that were online really were kind of brochureware. I'm talking more about businesses going online, right? So they're first companies are starting to try and figure out what this thing is, this internet. And those websites really often were just digital versions of the brochures that companies had already. The way they were set up and managed is kind of file-based, flat files on servers, and this is mostly done with like FTP systems. And if you were around those days, I guess you probably worked with them, and you may have also worked with the Macromedia suite. So this is really where it kind of got started. So developers were creating websites with these kinds of tools, and it's very file-based. But as these websites became more serious and started to expand, you see a need growing for having business users do certain things because it's more efficient, so that developers don't have to do everything. And also it gives them a little bit more control over who can do what. Right, and you have things like publication workflows where you can first create a draft and then have it reviewed and all these different things. So it's kind of a lot of business tooling that came up, and that's really when you see the CMS as a system, a content management system, start. And now this started in the 90s, but you see the first systems are very monolithic. They were very specifically focused on websites, and the big wave of the first vendors in that space really started in the early 2000s. So you see like Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, right? So those are originally more on the smaller or individual websites or smaller businesses, but there's at the same time you see these CMSs that are more focused on enterprises also get their start in the same period. So Sitecore and Adobe, that started as Day Software, but and there's others. All these CMSs kind of started at around the same time, and the technology here really focused more on the back end, right? So it's more discussion of, like, are you PHP developer or .NET or Java, which kind of influence the system you pick, and all of your customizations to the system would be in that more on the back end. So these systems were often like host your own, and the front ends were typically built with templating and templating engines that were built into these systems. So they were kind of combining everything into one. So the traditional CMS in that sense was very specifically based around building websites, often with themes and templates, right? So it's very tightly coupled, a tight coupling between the front end and the back end. And these systems would over time suffer a little bit from like feature bloat and slowly actually turn into suites where you get all these different things and you pay for everything, even if you don't need it. And as these things grew and the websites grew, you would also start to see some performance issues around everything being server-side rendered, but performance might suffer. So then in 2007, you see the first iPhone come into the market. And then as the years progressed, after that happened, you see the wave of like the introduction of smartphones and the popularity there. There's also the introduction of Internet of Things, right? So there's more and more systems and devices being connected to the internet. So the content kind of outgrew the internet a little bit, at least in the traditional website sense. And these traditional CMSs were not really well positioned to also manage content for these kinds of devices because of the tight coupling to these websites. So really, there's where you see we enter the area of what I would call the present. We're still in this situation. It's the introduction of the headless CMS. So the idea with the headless CMS is that you remove the decoupling of the CMS to a specific front end, and actually you replace that with a clear and clean API in the front, so that developers can get the data out in a specific structure, but use that to build experiences across a lot of different types of devices and applications. So mobile apps, websites still, of course, but also at some point things like car displays, in-store displays, fridges, wearables, all these different things. And that's still ongoing. There's still a lot of those new channels appearing, like voices, and is another example of like a new frontier that people are still figuring out. But the headless CMS is as well as an idea as well positioned to serve all of these things. And you see this similar thing on the technology side. So in the early 2010s, basically you see an explosion of a lot of JavaScript-based front-end frameworks come up. And, so all of the interesting stuff kind of started moving to the front end as you get Angular and React and Vue, and you see these sort of server-side rendering or a mix of server-side and client-side being introduced with an even static side generation. And then in 2017, you see the open sourcing of GraphQL by Facebook. So a lot of interesting stuff happening on the front end side of things, and of course that worked very well with this rise in the advent of headless CMS. So that kind of happened around the same time. So you see Contentful starting this in 2014, and then there's a lot of vendors that follow. And I picked a few of the sort of bigger ones, and but there are many. We got our start in 2017, actually just soon after the open sourcing of GraphQL, and that's really our origin story where we started as a headless CMS, but the first one to really only have a GraphQL API. All right, so that's the headless CMS, and if you just look at the characteristics, you see headless CMS is front-end agnostic compared to the traditional one that's very coupled. There's APIs to do all of the CRUD operations. It's very much decoupled, and it's focused on that developer flexibility that you need to be able to create those rich digital experience. And there's a lot of tooling around working with those APIs is also very typical for the headless CMS market. Okay, so that's still where we're in today, and this also went hand in hand with a move to microservices architectures that we're also seeing over the last, I guess, 5 to maybe 10 years. Well, the last number of years at least, that businesses are going back to like a best of breed situation also for their backend. And so this new thing that we're seeing is kind of a new potential problem, well, not even potential, there's something we're actually seeing in the market, something that is happening at the moment. So headless CMSs were introduced to kind of allow a lot more destinations for content. But what you see now is that there's also a lot more sources for content. And I mean content here in the wider sense. So everything, all the information you need to create that rich digital experience across all those different devices and destinations. So the backend now is no longer a monolith for a lot of organizations, or even if it still is, a lot of them will be looking to migrate to an architecture that has all these different best-of-breed solutions. So you would have a CMS and maybe a PIM or an e-commerce system, or it could be some other system of record, or a legacy system that still holds a lot of information that can't be easily migrated out. Right. So the problem here is that you have all these different systems in the backend. They're disconnected, but they have a piece of the puzzle that needs to be combined somewhere in the middle. And so what a lot of organizations are left with is this problem of having to create custom middleware to do that orchestration and the stitching and getting everything together, which is expensive, potentially painful. And we're actually seeing this in a lot of situations. So we see analysts starting to talk about this, right? There's a lot of agencies that mention that they see this issue, and our customers and prospects, same thing. So I found this great quote, which kind of illustrates this point really. And there's others, but this really captures the essence. So the idea is that you have all these different applications and platforms, and you need to do a significant amount of integration work to connect everything. And these challenges with integration can either be costly, specifically just because of the time that needs to be invested, or they cause delays, which in the end also cost money. So this is a problem that's not completely been solved. In fact, there are some vendors in this area that are experimenting with it, but we see this as a new problem space that is just getting its start at the moment. And there's different vendors coming from different directions to look at this, at solving this problem. The result here of this situation is that all these investments in digital experiences are kind of upside down, right? So you see all these organizations talking or investing a lot of time in this backend services and in integration and custom middleware, whereas what drives real customer value and business value is those unique digital experiences, powered by great, consistent, inspiring content. Right, so you would want to flip the investment period around as well, so that your investments align with your value creation. Okay, so that brings us to the future, how we're looking at this as HighGraph. So first of all, we see some vendors that have been around for a few years that are kind of looking at this orchestration stuff purely from a developer perspective and having a specific tool for this problem, and that's fine for certain situations, right? So you have Apollo, for example, really leading this in the GraphQL space. But we have a slightly different opinion and a different position also in the market here. And the main difference, I think, is that tools like Apollo, and to an extent Hasura, that's also building features around federation and orchestration, is that these systems are very specifically focused on the data and this backend side of things. In the case of Apollo, it's also you have to care about hosting and configuration and debugging. There's a lot of stuff that you have to do yourself. It's a powerful product, but still. And on the other hand, around managing content, of course, you have the headless content services and CMSs that's also our origin, but they do nothing of this sort of backend stuff. But we feel that there's a very logical combination of the two, because you still need the business tooling to kind of combine everything together, right? Take the example of an e-commerce website where you if you have marketing content that you need to manage through the tooling in your CMS, but you also have your system of record for products in the form of an e-commerce system, being able to easily combine things like price and availability from a commerce backend with great marketing content that a CMS is better positioned for, then being able to do both of those things in a single solution and having like this low-code, easy-to-use interface to configure everything, we think is an additional benefit on top of those other systems. So it's the combination of the low-code interface to configure everything. It's also software as a service, right? We're a hosted solution. It's the ease of use is much higher. So really, this is why we think this, the capabilities that a CMS offers naturally go very well with those sort of this orchestration and federation capabilities, because it's not just a developer thing. In the end, it's also a business thing. So this is basically where we are today. I mean, I know I talked about this as being the future because there's a lot still to figure out. So, the few slides further down, I have some ideas around where all of this is going. But this is not just something we see in the future. It's actually where we are today already. And the idea is that this is sort of that this is we're taking the first real tangible steps in this direction. And the way we're doing that as HighGraph is with a capability called remote sources. This has actually been introduced already, so it's out there. And the way this works is that when you're configuring a content schema and like a setup of all the different kinds of content you have within HighGraph, you have the option to add a remote source, which is basically a third-party vendor or a remote system that you can connect, and then you can very easily combine content and data from the remote source with content that sits within HighGraph. And the real benefit is you have this super easy to use user interface to connect everything together. It sort of automatically combines everything. It works with every REST and GraphQL API available, and we have some ideas about maybe extending that also to older like XML or SOAP-based architectures. And really what it does is it just makes it super simple to configure and reduces the time you need to get to value. Because what you get is one powerful performant GraphQL API that combines this data from all these different sources. So you can fire off one API request that gives you information from your CMS, information from your e-commerce system, information from a PIM, and all these things combined. And of course, we add things like caching and other performance improvements over the top to make sure that it's always available and up to standards for modern frontends. So, another way of looking at this and why we think this makes a lot of sense is that what we're basically doing is we're combining the flexibility of a database with the sort of the tangibility and the usefulness of a CMS, right? All the tooling you get from that, and then pair that with the extensibility of an API gateway, and all those things combined just solve the problem in a super easy and simple way, and gives developers and business users the flexibility back to work with all these things without having to worry too much about the orchestration and the middleware. This is the last slide I have before I talk a little bit about the future. So basically, these are just summarizing everything I mentioned here before, where things started with the web CMS, moving to the headless CMS, the federated content platform. As far as we see it, is the next logical step. So I guess the last question for now is like, what's next? So we, as HighGraph, we started with our first key feature in this area, but there's a lot of stuff that is still to be added, right? So The main things we're currently looking at is it's all based on the assumption and the kind of the premise that having this low code tool to do all of this flexibility, so you don't need to write a bunch of custom code, is the way to go. But there's of course a lot to do in terms of like building out the functionality. So the way we're currently looking at it is, like I mentioned, we're looking at making sure we can really combine every possible API into this federated content model, including, so we already support REST and GraphQL, but we're also looking at all these things around different authentication methods, legacy type APIs, all that stuff. There's also a bunch of things that we've already invested some time in working on performance measures, but we have all these ideas around working with what about stale content, or if there's errors, how do you deal with those kinds of things? And then thirdly, I think the really holy grail here is that you have a sort of a low-code platform that allows you to not just combine the data and stitch everything together easily, but actually also do all kinds of data transformations. So in the end, you can imagine having this federated content layer that really combines everything, allows you to get everything from all these different sources, and then on the fly transform it into exactly what you need, so that your developers working on your front end really have an awesome, fully functional GraphQL based middleware, an API layer that they can get for everything. They don't need to worry about where everything comes from, but they can just quickly and easily develop the stuff they need, and get all the value that they get from being able to work faster and more easily. So yeah, it's a really exciting future ahead of us that we see, and of course we have a ton of ideas, but we'd love to hear yours as well. So if this is something you're looking at, or that makes sense, you think potentially makes sense for your business, I'd love to continue the conversation. We have a community tier of the product and trials for all of our other stuff as well. So do go ahead and just try it out for yourself. I would encourage everybody who wants to play around with it to just go to highgraph.com and check it out. But I'd love to also have conversations about it. So don't hesitate to reach out to me either by email or off the back of this conference, or even in our community Slack to have a chat. Okay, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of this conference, and have a great day.